It's raining heavily. The camera is still on. Jimin is protecting Jungkook with his own body cloud red. A storm-soaked stage, a live camera, and a silent vow. When danger strikes, Jimin shields Jungkook, revealing love under relentless rain. The rain came down like a verdict, sudden and merciless, and over the roar of the crowd, Jungkook heard Jimin shout, "Don't move, look at me," just as something metal screamed loose above them. Water sheeted across the stage lights, turning the world into fractured halos and shadows. The camera was still on. The red tally blinked like a heartbeat, refusing to stop. Jungkook felt the slick wood under his shoes, the sting of rain in his eyes, and then the impact of Jimin's body slamming into him, a human shield that knocked the breath from his lungs and pressed him flat to the stage. The clang of falling rigging skidded, past where his head had been a moment before, sparks hissing as rain kissed electricity. For a second there was only sound, rain drumming, cables whining, the crowd gasping as one living creature. Jimin's forearm was locked across Jungkook's chest, firm and shaking, his breath hot and ragged against Jungkook's ear. "Stay," Jimin whispered, not pleading, commanding, the way he did when fear threatened to pull him apart. Jungkook's mind flashed backward and forward at once. He saw the practice room mirrors, fogged by breath, where Jimin always tied his shoelaces twice, always checked Jungkook's mic pack last. He saw the night he'd learned to read the tiny tremor in Jimin's hands when he smiled too brightly. And now he felt the truth of it. Jimin's weight, his warmth, the way he absorbed the shock so Jungkook didn't have to. "Jimin," Jungkook said, rain swallowing his voice. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Jimin lied, and Jungkook knew it by the way he always knew, by the hitch that followed the word, by the way Jimin refused to meet his eyes. Blood diluted by rain ran along Jimin's temple, tracing a pale path over skin Jungkook had memorized under calmer lights. The stage manager's voice crackled in their earpieces, panic flattened into protocol. "Cut the feed! Cut!" The order never landed. The camera kept watching, unblinking, as Jimin lifted his head and scanned the chaos with the focus of someone who had learned long ago how to survive being seen. Jimin had always lived with cameras like a second weather. They had watched him grow careful, then braver, then careful again. They had seen his laugh and missed the nights he couldn't sleep because the past crept in through the dark, because he remembered the fall during training, the sound his body made when it hit, the helplessness of it. He hated falling. He hated the thought of Jungkook falling more. "Can you stand?" Jimin asked, softer now. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, made his eyelashes clump. Jungkook nodded, though his knees argued. Jimin rose first, placing himself between Jungkook and the dangling lights without thinking. It was habit, reflex, love sharpened into instinct. They moved together, a choreography born not of rehearsal but of trust. The crew rushed in, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers, hands guiding them off the stage. The crowd's roar shifted into a worried murmur. Somewhere, thunder cracked like a curtain call no one wanted. Backstage smelled like ozone and wet fabric. The lights were harsh, revealing the bruise blooming along Jimin's shoulder, the way he favored his side despite insisting he didn't. A medic reached for him and Jimin flinched, then stilled himself, jaw set. Jungkook caught his wrist. "Hey," he said, grounding them both. "It's over." Jimin exhaled, long and shaky. "I thought—" He stopped. He never finished sentences that scared him. He glanced toward the monitors, where the last frozen frame showed them on the stage, rain-blurred bodies entwined in an unmistakable act of protection. They saw. Jungkook followed his gaze and felt a strange calm settle. The fear was still there, coiled and hot, but beneath it was something steadier. "Let them," he said. "They always see pieces. This was us." Jimin searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret. He found none. He laughed then, a small, disbelieving sound. "You're impossible," he said, and leaned his forehead against Jungkook. Rainwater dripped between them, a thin line connecting their breaths. Later, when the storm eased into a whisper and the arena emptied, they sat wrapped in towels, listening to the world come back together. Jimin's habit resurfaced. He counted his breaths under his breath, the way he did when pain threatened to take the wheel. Jungkook matched him, silently, anchoring them both. Outside, the camera lights finally went dark. What remained was the echo of rain, the memory of a body thrown without hesitation into harm's way, and the quiet understanding that some truths only reveal themselves when everything else is stripped away. The hallway outside the dressing rooms was still slick with rainwater when Jungkook finally broke the silence. "You didn't even think," he said, voice low but sharp, the kind that cut deeper than shouting. "You just jumped." Jimin stopped walking. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, too bright, too exposed. He turned slowly, towel slipping from his shoulders, eyes dark and burning with something that wasn't pain. "I did think," he answered. "I thought you were about to get crushed." "That's not thinking, Jungkook swallowed, fists clenched. "That's throwing yourself away." Jimin stepped closer, close enough that Jungkook could smell rain and antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of blood. "If it was you," Jimin said, each word deliberate, "I would do it again, every time." The air between them tightened. Jungkook's heartbeat roared louder than the storm outside. "You don't get to decide that alone," he snapped. "You don't get to scare me like that and pretend it's nothing." Jimin laughed once, bitter. "Nothing. Jungkook, my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't feel my fingers. I was terrified." His voice cracked despite himself. "But the idea of you getting hurt was worse." Jungkook's anger faltered, collapsing into something raw and exposed. He reached out without realizing it, fingers gripping the edge of Jimin's jacket as if anchoring him. "Do you know what it felt like?" he whispered. "To be under you like that? To think I might open my eyes and you would." Jimin's gaze dropped to Jungkook's hand, then lifted again, vulnerable and unguarded. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I didn't move until I heard you breathe." A door slammed somewhere down the corridor, jolting them apart. Staff voices murmured, cameras clicking in the distance. The world was already spinning its own version of what had happened, controversy brewing like thunderclouds. Jungkook could almost see the headlines forming, the slowed-down footage, the speculation. "They're going to tear this apart," Jungkook said. "They'll say it was staged, or reckless, or that we crossed a line." Jimin shrugged, but his shoulders were tense. "They always say something." He hesitated, then added, "What scares me is not them. It's you pulling away because of this." Jungkook looked at him, really looked, at the bruise darkening Jimin's skin, at the exhaustion carved into his face, at the stubborn loyalty that had always been both his strength and his curse. "I'm not pulling away," he said. "I'm standing right here, trying to understand why you think your life weighs less than mine." Jimin closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet but steady. "Because loving you rewrote the math," he said, "and I don't know how to undo it." The words landed heavy, undeniable. Jungkook felt something shift inside him, a door cracking open that had been sealed by fear and rules and unspoken warnings. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Then stop deciding alone. Next time we face it together." Jimin searched his face, as if expecting hesitation, retreat. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Together," he echoed. Outside, the rain finally eased, leaving only the distant drip of water and the echo of a night that had changed them. The camera might have been off now, but what it had captured could never be erased. A moment of instinctive devotion, a truth exposed under the storm. And as they stood there, bruised, shaken, and unmistakably bound, both of them understood that nothing after this would ever be simple again. The first thing Jungkook heard the next morning was his phone vibrating itself off the table. He didn't answer it. He lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain's aftertaste drip from somewhere outside, Jimin's words from the night before looping relentlessly in his head. "Loving you rewrote the math." The sentence clung to him like damp clothes, heavy and impossible to ignore. When he finally picked up the phone, it wasn't a call anymore. It was dozens of messages, notifications stacked like accusations. Clips, screenshots, headlines forming faster than the truth ever could. "Did you see this? Are they okay? Was it scripted or real? Jimin threw himself over jungkook. This is insane." Jungkook's stomach twisted. He sat up, dragging a hand through his hair, and pressed the screen off just as the door to his hotel room opened without a knock. Jimin stepped inside, eyes shadowed, hair still damp as if he'd showered and failed to wash the night away. He locked the door behind him, leaned back against it, and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "They're calling an emergency meeting," Jimin said. "Management, PR, everyone." Jungkook didn't look at him. "Let me guess, damage control." Jimin's mouth tightened. "They want statements, they want explanations, they want us to say it was instinct, professionalism, adrenaline." "And was it?" Jungkook asked quietly. Silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Jimin pushed himself off the door and crossed the room in slow steps. "If I say no," he said, "everything changes." Jungkook finally met his eyes. "And if you say yes?" "Then I lie," Jimin replied. Again. The word hung there, sharp and cutting. Jungkook stood, closing the distance between them until there was barely air to breathe. "I'm tired of being careful," he said. "I almost watched you get crushed in front of thousands of people, on camera." Jimin's voice dropped. "And I almost watched you disappear." Jungkook laughed, breathless and broken. "Do you hear us? This isn't something PR can rewrite." Jimin reached out, stopping just short of touching him, fingers hovering as if afraid of crossing an invisible line. "They're already saying I endangered you, that I was reckless, emotional, unstable." "Let them," Jungkook snapped. "What about what you want?" Jimin flinched. It was subtle, but Jungkook saw it. Wanting was dangerous territory for Jimin. Wanting had always been something he tucked away, something he paid for later. "I want you alive," Jimin said. "I want you beside me, and I want the world to stop using us like a story they can twist." Jungkook's voice softened, almost breaking. "Then stop protecting me from myself. I chose this life too. I choose you too." Jimin's breath hitched. "Don't say that unless you mean it." Jungkook stepped closer, their foreheads nearly touching. "I've never meant anything more." A knock shattered the moment, loud and urgent. Jimin pulled back instantly, the walls snapping back into place, but his eyes betrayed him. They were burning. The meeting room was cold and glassy, full of polite smiles and calculated concern. The footage played on loop, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Jungkook watched himself fall, watched Jimin move without hesitation, watched the moment the world caught fire. "This is dangerous," someone said. "It fuels speculation." "It humanizes them," someone else countered. Jimin sat perfectly still, hands folded, jaw clenched. Jungkook could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. When the question finally came, "Why did you do it?" Jimin's answer was immediate. "Because I wasn't going to let him get hurt." The room went quiet. "That's not what we discussed," a manager said carefully. Jimin lifted his gaze. "That's the truth." Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. He didn't know whether to be terrified or proud. Outside, the world was already erupting. Fans argued. Critics dissected. Lines were drawn. And somewhere between the noise and the rain-soaked memory of a stage, Jungkook realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. No matter what happened next, there was no going back to before. The backlash arrived faster than the rain ever had. By the time Jungkook and Jimin were escorted out of the building through a side exit, their names were already trending worldwide. The van door slammed shut, sealing them inside a narrow space thick with tension and unspoken fear. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows like accusations that refused to fade. Jimin broke first. "They're suspending rehearsals," he said, voice flat. "They said it's temporary until things calm down." Jungkook scoffed softly. "Things never calm down. They just find new ways to burn." Jimin turned toward him sharply. "This isn't a joke." "I know," Jungkook replied, eyes blazing. "That's why I'm angry. They're acting like you committed a crime by caring whether I lived or died." Jimin dragged a hand down his face. "They're not wrong to worry. I stepped out of line." "You stepped in front of falling metal," Jungkook shot back. "If that's crossing a line, then the line is broken." The van hit a bump, jolting them closer together. Jimin's shoulder brushed Jungkook, and neither of them moved away. Jimin's voice dropped, rough around the edges. Do you know what they said about you? Jungkook stiffened. What? They said you made me reckless, that you're a distraction, that I'd think more clearly if I kept my distance. Jungkook laughed, sharp and humorless. So now I'm the problem. Jimin snapped. No, they're the problem for thinking love is a weakness. The word slipped out before either of them could stop it. Love. It echoed inside the van, loud and irreversible. Jungkook's breath caught. He turned slowly, searching Jimin's face for retreat, for regret. Jimin didn't look away. If I hadn't moved, Jimin continued, voice trembling despite his effort to control it, I would be replaying that moment for the rest of my life, wondering why I hesitated, wondering why I chose safety over you. Jungkook reached out, gripping Jimin's sleeve. And what about now? He asked. What happens if choosing me costs you everything? Jimin's eyes softened, dark and unwavering. Then I lose everything knowing I didn't lose you. The van pulled to a stop. Their driver cleared his throat awkwardly, pretending not to feel the gravity in the air. Jimin let go first, straightening his jacket, rebuilding the armor piece by piece. Inside the building, the atmosphere was colder than before. Phones buzzed nonstop. Staff avoided eye contact. A senior executive waited in a quiet room, hands folded, expression unreadable. We need to talk about boundaries, the executive began. What happened on that stage crossed into something personal. Jungkook leaned forward. We're people before we're performers. The executive sighed. And that is exactly the problem. Jimin's jaw tightened. Then say it. Say you don't want us to feel anything. That's not what I said, the executive replied. I'm saying the world is watching. Every look, every move. If they decide this is more than professionalism. It is more, Jungkook interrupted. It always has been. The room froze. Jimin turned toward him, shock and something like awe flickering across his face. Jungkook. No, Jungkook said, standing. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I'm done pretending that what we do for each other is just instinct, or training, or coincidence. Silence stretched unbearably long. The executive finally spoke, quieter now. If you go down this road, there will be consequences. Jungkook looked at Jimin, really looked, at the man who had thrown himself into danger without hesitation, at the fear he carried, the loyalty he never rationed, the love he tried so hard to hide. We already face the worst part, Jungkook said softly, almost losing each other. Jimin rose slowly, heart pounding, every instinct screaming risk. But for the first time, fear didn't win. He took Jungkook's hand, openly, deliberately. If the world wants a story, Jimin said, voice steady despite the storm it would unleash, then let it be the truth. Outside, cameras flashed as they stepped into view together, no longer hiding the gravity between them. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere, thunder rolled again, distant but inevitable. And as the rain began to fall once more, Jungkook felt something settle deep in his chest. Not fear, not doubt, but a fierce, unshakable certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it standing side by side. The rain followed them into the night, softer now but relentless, as if the sky itself refused to let the moment rest. Inside the private elevator, the doors slid shut with a muted click that sounded final. The silence between them was thick, charged, no longer cautious but exposed. Jimin let go of Jungkook's hand only when the walls closed in, when instinct warned him how dangerous it was to be seen like that. Still, the heat lingered, a phantom touch neither of them could shake. You didn't warn me, Jimin said quietly, eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers. You said it out loud. Jungkook leaned back against the wall, heart still racing. I meant it. That wasn't just defiance, Jimin replied. That was a declaration. Jungkook's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. You jumped in front of falling steel for me. I think the declaration already happened. Jimin finally looked at him then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked. Do you know how terrified I am right now? Yes, Jungkook said, because I feel it too. The elevator stopped. Their floor. A shared space they were no longer sure was safe. Jimin hesitated before stepping out, as if crossing the threshold might collapse everything they had left intact. Inside the room, the city pulsed beyond the windows, alive and unforgiving. Phones buzzed nonstop on the table, screens lighting up with reactions, outrage, support, betrayal. Jungkook ignored them all. He watched Jimin pace instead, watched the way his fingers trembled when he tried to steady them. "They're rewriting everything," Jimin said. "Our past, our gestures, our silences." He laughed bitterly. "They're saying I've been protecting you for years." Jungkook's voice was low. "Have you?" Jimin stopped. The question hit harder than any accusation. "I don't know when it stopped being instinct and started being something else," he admitted. "I just know that when I see you hurt, I can't think straight." Jungkook crossed the room in 2 strides. "That doesn't make you weak." "It makes me vulnerable," Jimin shot back. "And vulnerability has a price." Jungkook reached out, cupping Jimin's face before he could retreat. The contact was bold, dangerous, achingly gentle. "So does pretending you don't feel anything." Jimin's breath shuddered. "If we do this," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "there's no undoing it." "I know." The kiss wasn't soft. It was urgent, messy, years of restraint breaking all at once. Rain streaked the window behind them as if the world were watching, bearing witness. Jimin pulled away first, forehead pressed to Jungkook, tears mixing with rainwater still clinging to his lashes. "I'm angry," Jimin confessed. "At them, at myself, at how much I want this." Jungkook held him tighter. "Then be angry, just don't be alone." A knock shattered the fragile bubble. Sharp, insistent, reality pounding its way back in. Jimin stepped away, breathing hard, wiping his face as the armor slid back into place. When the door opened, the manager's expression was grim. "You need to see this," he said, holding up a tablet. A clip played, slow motion, enhanced audio, their voices isolated. "Don't move, look at me." The moment Jimin's body shielded Jungkook replayed again and again. "This is everywhere," the manager continued. "And there's something else." He hesitated. "They found internal footage, training room. Years ago, Jimin, you pushed Jungkook out of the way during a lighting test. Same instinct, same reaction." Jimin's blood ran cold. Jungkook stared at the screen, realization dawning. "You never told me." Jimin swallowed, "Because I didn't want it to mean something." The manager lowered the tablet. "They're calling it a pattern, a narrative of devotion. It's romantic, controversial, explosive." His gaze hardened. "You need to decide who you are in that story." After the door closed, the room felt smaller. Jungkook's voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "All this time, you've been choosing me without telling me." Jimin nodded slowly. "And now the world wants me to explain it." Jungkook took his hands, grounding him. "Then don't explain, live it." Jimin let out a shaky laugh that sounded like surrender. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," Jungkook said. "It's just worth it." Outside, the rain finally began to thin, the storm losing its grip. Inside, something just as powerful settled between them. Not certainty, not safety, but a shared resolve born from truth finally spoken aloud. Whatever the consequences, they were done hiding from themselves. Morning arrived without mercy. Sunlight cut through the curtains like an interrogation lamp, exposing everything the night had tried to soften. Jungkook woke to the sound of Jimin's voice, low and strained, speaking on the phone in the corner of the room. "No," Jimin said. "I won't apologize for saving him." A pause, Jimin's shoulders tightened. "Then suspend me." Jungkook sat up. "Jimin." The call ended abruptly. Jimin turned, eyes already heavy with exhaustion and fury. "They want a written statement by noon," he said. "A denial, distance, a promise it won't happen again." Jungkook swung his legs off the bed. And I told them I can't promise that," Jimin replied, "because I'd be lying." Jungkook crossed the room, stopping just inches away. "They'll make this ugly." Jimin gave a humorless smile. "They already have." He gestured to the phone. "Sponsors are pulling out, some fans are furious, others are fighting for us like it's a war." Jungkook's jaw clenched. I never wanted you to bleed for me like this. Jimin's voice cracked. You think I don't know that? He ran a hand through his hair, packing again. I spent years learning how to survive without wanting anything too much, and then you exist, and suddenly all my rules mean nothing. Jungkook stepped into his path. Look at me. Jimin did. His eyes were red, raw, stripped of performance. If they force you to choose, Jungkook said quietly, choose yourself. Jimin shook his head immediately. That's the one thing I can't do. Anger flared hot in Jungkook's chest. Don't turn this into martyrdom. I won't let you disappear for me. Jimin laughed, sharp and broken. You already let me. The words stunned them both. Jungkook's voice softened, dangerous in its honesty. I didn't know. You never let me see how deep it went. Because I was afraid, Jimin admitted. Afraid that once you saw it, you'd feel trapped, or guilty, or worse, responsible. Jungkook grabbed his wrists. I feel responsible now because you keep deciding alone. Jimin's breath hitched. Then stay, he whispered. Stay with me while everything burns. Jungkook didn't hesitate. I am. The meeting that followed was brutal. Faces hardened by risk calculations, voices wrapped in concern that sounded too much like control. When Jungkook spoke calm, unwavering, the room shifted. What happened wasn't choreography, he said. It wasn't a mistake. It was a human reaction. If that's unacceptable, then maybe the system is. Jimin watched him with something like awe and terror. No one had ever stood that openly beside him before. The fallout was immediate. Statements leaked. Schedules collapsed. A joint appearance was canceled, then uncanceled, then pushed back again. The world fractured into sides, and every side wanted a piece of them. That night, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. No cameras, no handlers, just wind and neon and the echo of everything they'd risked. Are you scared? Jimin asked. Jungkook nodded, terrified. Jimin's voice was barely there. Me too. They leaned into each other anyway, foreheads touching, breathing in sync like they'd done 1,000 times before. Only now, without pretending it meant nothing. Below them, the city roared on, hungry and relentless. Above them, the sky was clear for the first time since the storm. Whatever they'd awakened, it couldn't be undone. And in the quiet between heartbeats, both of them understood the same truth. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a choice. The interview studio smelled faintly of makeup powder and overheated lights. A sterile calm stretched thin over something volatile. Jungkook sat with his hands folded, feeling the weight of the chair beneath him, the invisible pressure of millions of eyes waiting beyond the glass. Jimin sat beside him, posture perfect, expression controlled to the point of fracture. The host smiled too carefully. People are calling that moment reckless, she said. Some say it crossed professional boundaries. How do you respond? Jimin inhaled, slow and measured. I respond by saying that if I had to choose again, he said, voice steady but low, I would still step forward. A ripple moved through the room. Jungkook turned his head slightly, just enough to see the corner of Jimin's mouth tighten, the tell he only showed when fear tried to surface. You don't regret it, the host pressed. No, Jimin replied. I regret that the world finds it easier to analyze love than to accept it. The word hit like a dropped glass. Jungkook felt his pulse spike, heat rushing to his face, but he didn't look away. He leaned forward instead. People keep asking why he did it, he said. No one asks why the system made that moment dangerous in the first place. The studio went silent. Afterward, the backlash was immediate and violent. Praise collided with outrage. Some called them brave, others called them irresponsible. The internet fractured under the weight of interpretation. Jungkook watched it unfold on his phone until Jimin gently took it from his hands. Don't, Jimin murmured. You'll bleed trying to read all of it. Jungkook met his gaze. You've been bleeding quietly for years. Jimin swallowed, and you gave me a reason to stop. That night, alone in the quiet of the apartment, the tension finally snapped. Jungkook confronted him, voice shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. Do you know how many times I thought you were just stronger than me? That you didn't need anything the way I did. Jimin laughed softly, painfully. I needed you more than I ever let myself admit. Jungkook stepped closer, words spilling out unchecked. Then why did you keep hiding? Because I was afraid if I leaned too hard, Jimin said, eyes glossy. You'd disappear, or worse, stay out of obligation. Jungkook's reply was immediate, fierce. I stayed because I wanted to. I'm still here because I want to be. Jimin broke then, the control finally giving way. He pressed his forehead to Jungkook's shoulder, breath uneven. I don't know how to do this without hurting you. Then hurt with me, Jungkook whispered. Not alone. Days passed in a blur of canceled schedules and private conversations. When the official announcement finally came, an indefinite hiatus framed in careful language, the weight of it settled heavy but honest. No denial, no apology, just space. They walked outside together for the first time without handlers, hoodies pulled low, hands brushing openly. A fan recognized them, eyes wide, trembling. Jungkook felt Jimin stiffen, instinct rising again. But the fan didn't shout. She bowed her head slightly and said, "Thank you for being real." Jimin exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Later, as evening settled and the city lights flickered on, they stood at the window again, the storm long gone. Jungkook rested his head against Jimin's shoulder. "We don't know what comes next," he said. Jimin nodded. "But for the first time, I'm not afraid of not knowing." They stayed there, quiet and unguarded, knowing the world would keep watching, judging, twisting, but also knowing something unshakable had already been decided. They had chosen each other. And this time, they weren't letting go. The night they finally stopped running, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet. Rain threatened again, a soft whisper against the windows, but it never fell. Jungkook lay awake beside Jimin, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the proof of life that had once terrified him to imagine losing. In the dim light, Jimin looked younger, unguarded, the sharp edges smoothed by exhaustion and truth. "I used to think," Jimin said softly, breaking the silence, "that loving someone meant learning how to disappear for them." Jungkook turned toward him. And now I know it means staying," Jimin replied, "even when it's terrifying." Jungkook reached for his hand, fingers threading together without hesitation, without fear of who might see. "You stayed on that stage," he said. "You stayed when everything told you to step back. Let me stay too." Jimin closed his eyes, emotion flickering openly across his face. "I don't know what our future looks like," he admitted. "The industry doesn't forgive easily, neither does the world." Jungkook smiled, small but certain. "Neither do storms, but they pass." Weeks later, the noise softened. Not gone, never gone, but quieter. New stories replaced old ones. Speculation faded into memory. What remained were choices made in private moments, hands held in empty rooms, laughter returning slowly, carefully. They returned to the stage eventually, not under flashing controversy, but under warm lights and honest applause. No grand announcement, no labels spoken aloud. Just glances that lingered, smiles that no longer hid, and a trust so visible it no longer needed defense. When the rain came again, because it always did, it found them ready, standing side by side, unafraid of the cameras, unwilling to step back. And this time, no one fell. Because love, once spoken and chosen, had become the strongest shelter they had ever known.